Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, the Knife Raven here, back again with another video. And in today's video, well, it should not come as much of a surprise that yet again, I revert back to reviewing Sheffield knives. And today, it isn't an Ettrick, I know, shock, twist of the century. Yes, it isn't an Ettrick, or a Barlow. In fact, today, it's a knife I have never experienced before. And that is, made by Arthur Wright Son, the Peach Pruner. Now, the Peach Pruner is a very, very interesting little model, and it has quite the shocking amount of usefulness. Now, I know those who would like to say that a knife called a pruner is really only good for one thing, and that is pruning. But, as you'd expect, this knife does a lot more than just pruning. And today, I'll be doing a bit more of a deep dive on that, and going into what this knife is very, very useful for. So, without further ado, let's have a look at it. Starting off, you have brass pins on either side, and these are, by the way, perfectly flush. You can't even feel them. Excellent, excellent job. The bolsters, of course, are nickel silver, mirror polished. Again, got a bit of a shine to them. Transitions here are quite good. You can sort of feel the difference between these two, but there's definitely no noticeable gap or hill. It's quite smooth overall. This side a little less so. This one's a bit poorer, but I've noticed that buffalo horn tends to do that. As a natural material, it can curl, it can bend, it can warp, it can expand, it can shrink, all based on the temperature and the way it is stored and used and cared for. So, again, I can't be too harsh on the craftsman for that, but again, very nice transitions overall, particularly on the pins. Spring is, of course, quite thicker than most traditional knife springs, and being an Arthur Wright, you can imagine it's just as snappy. Gapping is very, very insignificant here. There's a tiny bit of gapping up here, as you might be able to see, but holding it up to the light, only a very, very slight glimmer can shine through. But, again, nice brass liners. Smooth overall. Handle is a swayback in its design, which is often biased to holding it in the reverse grip, which this knife excels at. Centering is pretty much perfect. It's ever so slightly off to the left, but not by much. In fact, I could probably push it almost back into place. Yeah, that's a very, very close to perfect knife. You have your stop pin of brass in the front, or I should say the back. There's enough blade out that you could definitely pinch this, but I actually prefer to use the nail nick as this is a shockingly strong pull. Very snappy. I would give this an easy 8, if not higher. Which does bring me to one quick little thing about Arthur Wright. I've had 3 of their knives, all lambfoots, that have had structural errors, and the springs, for whatever reason, have snapped. And I'm unsure if this has anything to do with poor heat treatment, or perhaps, and this is what I'm a little concerned about, over-tightened springs. See, perhaps the undue pressure from such a strong action could put a bit of extra strain on the frame of the knife and perhaps cause some form of breakage to occur. I'm not claiming that this is true, and it's just a guess of mine that's probably wrong, but it is worth mentioning that these knives have had some flaws in the past, and I'm bringing this up not because I have anything against the company or because I want people to avoid buying from them, but more just because I want to be an honest reviewer, and I want to mention, even though I've had some amazing Arthur Wright knives with brilliant fit and finish that have lasted years already, unfortunately, there are the few that have had some significant problems. But any brand can have that, but I'm just going to say it now before I forget. So, in the meantime, we have a satin-finished blade made of C70 carbon steel, and this is in what I believe Americans would call a Hawkbill or a Hawksbill. Now, for those in the UK, or perhaps Europe more generally, this would be known as a peach pruner blade. And it's a modified Wharncliffe, and it starts with the gradual curve and pronounced tip of a Wharncliffe, but the edge itself is curved. Now, I have a very good knife for comparison here, and this is made by the same company, in the same handle material, and these knives almost look like they could be part of a set. Here it is next to... I said I wasn't going to review one, but I found a way to bring it into the video anyway. Here is a Buffalo Ettrick by Arthur Wright, and this is a proper Wharncliffe. You have your gradual swoop on the spine with a very pronounced tip and a straight edge, which makes for some very pleasant sharpening. And again, you can definitely see the similarities. There is a curved spine, pronounced tip, but the difference is that this does not have a straight edge. It has a slightly curved edge. And I definitely think that I prefer the Wharncliffe, as I have many, many Wharncliffe knives, and they are easily my favorites out of all the knives I own. But even so, for a very similar blade shape, I could get to liking the Peach Pruner. I think it's utilitarian enough that you'd want to carry it, but it's not so incredibly robust and simple like, say, a spear point. Little side ramble here. I love spear points, but they tend to be very bland. I don't know how to describe it, but they have a certain simplicity to them that isn't always something I enjoy. And I have some spear point knives. In fact, my last video was on a spear point. But despite this, I tend to prefer blades with a much more pronounced tip. They're a lot more slender, more elegant to me, and that's why I favor models such as the Ettrick so much, because this knife has a very pronounced tip, being a Wharncliffe and all. This knife, despite having quite a bit of utility value, still has that very delicate point, which would be great for making draw cuts and just general piercing work. Another thing that this shares with the Ettrick is it's very comfortable in the backhand position. Both of these knives are catering to the reverse of handle and definitely feel much, much more comfortable when being held like this. And that's perfect if you are a gardener and you're, say, reaching around a branch or a vine and you're cutting back towards you. Or perhaps you're peeling an apple or whittling. These are just some of the uses that blades and swayback handles, such as these, excel at. Again, back to the blade itself. A Wright, Sheffield, England. The Sheffield's a little hard to see. Actually, no, fairly clear. I was told that these are an old-fashioned press where the stamps are put in, and how deep and how clear they are will depend on the current worker at the time. Say, if you've got a lot of strength behind the press, you will have a very pronounced and very clear stamp, but if you are putting a bit of lighter pressure, you won't notice it as much. Blade play, as with pretty much every Arthur Wright knife, is non-existent, and that is a good thing. Your blade to spring transition here is fairly good. I've seen better, but I've also seen worse. 4-finger grip on this handle, just like the Ettrick, although the Ettrick does have a bit more to hold on to. some would see it as a bit strange and perhaps unwelcoming, but I still like the Ettrick's to hold your measurements, which I guess I will do now. Again, I've probably measured the Ettrick 12 times at this point. You're looking at 6 1/4 inches overall. The handle is going to be coming in just around 4, and the blade is about 2 1/4. The Peach Pruner is similar in overall dimension, but very different in the handle. Handle is not even 3 1/2 inches, whereas the blade is just a little over 2 1/2, including the cutting edge, of course, or pardon me, including the unsharpened bit. If you're looking at just cutting edge, it's 2 1/4. The Ettrick, with just the cutting edge, is just about 2. So these are both very UK legal, of course, and there's no way you can measure this where the blade's over 3 inches. And the overall dimensions on this knife are 6 inches. So, really, these knives are very, very close, except that the Ettrick has an extra 1/4 inch, probably due to the substantially larger handle, although the Peach Pruner does boast a bit of a larger blade, both in width and also in length. So very, very nice knives here. Again, I managed to bring the Ettrick back into the video, but let's move that aside for a moment. The only other Peach Pruner I have... Oh, good grief. It just hit me. The only other Peach Pruner I have... Don't laugh. Is an Ettrick Pruner from Michael May. Quit your snickering. Anyways, this blade is a pruner, a Peach Pruner as well. And again, very similar in its profile, same steel, C70. Different makers, of course, but both are situated in Sheffield. This one doesn't have any kind of swedge, whereas this one does. And this one has a significantly lighter pull. But again, it has the swoopy handle of an Ettrick. Very nice. I really like this knife. Great for general purpose and garden use. So, back to this. What are my thoughts on this piece? Well, I think that it is an excellent knife with very, very nice quality. And for an Arthur Wright, there have definitely been worse knives. The only flaw I can really find here, and this is, even now I'm unsure if I can call this a flaw anymore. The blade is off to the left quite a fair bit. Comparing it to the Ettrick, you can see that it's very similar actually. Well, the Ettrick might be a little less noticeable. But I have been told that this is a practice done on purpose where the blade is reheated and then bent to straighten it within the liners. And as much as I would pass that off as, well, rubbish, why would they bend their blades on purpose? At the same time, it makes sense, as aligning a knife and creating one is a very delicate process, and even the slightest misstep, if you will, could cause the whole thing to be, well, asymmetrical and just generally off. And, well, I have enough knives to know that pretty much every brand I've ever bought from has, at least to some level, had a blade bent in the open position. And, of course, I'm referring to traditionals here. And that really does make me wonder that, well, sad as it may be, or maybe it's a good thing, this is done intentionally. Now, why would that be sad? Well, it's sad because it means they're not going to consider this a flaw, and they're not going to try to stop it because it's something that they do to remove, I should say, another flaw, which is the blade rubbing within the liners. And I suppose I understand why you do that, because it's certainly better to have a slightly off blade than have a blade that scrapes the inside of the knife every time you open it. But even so, I wish that there was still, well, I wish we lived in a world where there were no bends, there were no warps, and that the blades were hafted perfectly. But again, I'm no knife maker, and here I am complaining about how professional knife makers make knives. So I don't think I'm qualified to really do that. But as a bit of a pretentious reviewer, if you will, I am going to point it out, and I am going to be a little disappointed in the fact. But even so, the issue really starts making itself known when the edge is bent. Because when the edge is bent, you won't have a clean, straight cut. The edge isn't bent, it's just the pivot, or I should say where the tang is. That is what has been bent to fit the blade within the liners. So there you are. That is something that I've noticed with Arthur Wright knives, Taylor's Eyewitness knives, Case, GEC, Boker, Buck, Ottermesser. Name any brand that I own that makes traditional knives, and chances are I will be able to find you a slightly offset blade. Some are worse than others, of course, and I do believe that perhaps depending on how off the blade is in the liners, that might change how much they have to bend it to fit the blade. But regardless, I don't know if I'd call this a flaw. Look at it as you will. If you want complete perfection, well, perhaps look elsewhere. But the price for this knife was very reasonable. I believe it cost only 30 GBP. And that is quite the contrast to the Wolstenholme, another Sheffield maker. At Heine Haynes, which is where I bought this, they had a Wolstenholme Peach Pruner in buffalo horn. So essentially the same knife, just made by a different maker, using their styles, their fit and finish, and their steel. And that knife, I believe, was double, if not triple, the price of this one. So I'm very happy with this knife for the price. It's not the cheapest Arthur Wright I've ever bought. That would go to the Rosewood Ettrick, which cost, I believe, only 14 GBP. 14 GBP. But this one is, again, they're paying for the materials. These are very, very pretty handles, which I didn't really showcase all that well. There isn't much of a lightning pattern here, just a bit of a simple, almost epoxy-esque black. Very reflective, plays with the light quite well. This side is definitely my favorite, as it has these lovely grayish white flecks, and these make for a nice contrast to just the plain and very overwhelming void black that you have here. The other buffalo knife by Wright is somewhat similar. You can see there is that little bit of gray in the center. This side, not as much. But again, with buffalo horn, which is a bit more of an expensive material, you're going to be looking at a higher price. I actually would have gone with rosewood or ebony had it been available, but this was the only handle that they had, and I figured, you've been wanting one of these for a while, go ahead and get one before you miss out, and they cost 60 GBP elsewhere. So I went ahead and got it, and I'm definitely not disappointed. It's got a strong action, feels great in the hand. It's not going to be weighing you down in your pocket. It's not going to be heavy or cumbersome. Very nice, feels excellent to carry, and the blade actually came fairly sharp for an Arthur Wright, so good for them. They're finally figuring out how to sharpen their knives. And there I go again with my complaints. So, thank you very much for watching. Again, I think that this is a pattern that definitely should be considered. It's not as aggressive as a normal Hawkbill, which curves all the way around, and it's a bit more utilitarian, perhaps, even than just the Ettrick. So if you're considering buying a knife from Wright, and you're looking for one that's a bit more, I guess you could say, detached from the typical American take on a Hawkbill, but you still want a knife that could do well in pruning tasks, but also make for a good, classy carry knife, this would be a great choice. So, this has been the Wright Son Peach Pruner in buffalo horn, and this is the Knife Raven. As always, signing off. Goodbye.